Welcome to Lot 76 Cars. My name's Simon and welcome to the Renault Megane Coupe. Project X64 began in 1990. From 4 styling proposals submitted to Patrick Lequemont, he chose one, and this was the one by Michael Jardin. It was actually frozen then for production in April 1992. Inspired by the Renault 16 from the late 1960s, a very successful first foray into a hatchback for Renault, the Megane one was unveiled at the 1995 Frankfurt Motor Show. It was a direct replacement for the Renault 19 predecessor car, and in fact that vehicle donated its floor pan, many of its engines and transmissions to the Megane. The Megane 1 was offered in several body styles. It was offered a 3-door, a 5-door hatchback, a saloon, a convertible, an estate later on in life, and then finally this coupe version that I'm driving here today. Safety at the time was a key focus for Renault. The marketing focus on safety meant that Megane benefited from a pillar-mounted 3-point seatbelt for the middle rear occupant, which was unusual because many cars at that stage only had lap belts. It also had standard front belt pre-tensioners, a load limiters, a driver's airbag, and it's significantly in terms of safety, all of this delivered a very, very impressive Euro NCAP, New Car Assessment Programme safety rating. In fact, so impressive that actually it was ahead of the VW Golf Mark III, the Opel Astra F, the Ford Escort of the time. During its production run, the Renault was actually produced in a number of factories in Turkey, France, Spain, Russia, Argentina, Colombia, and in Belgium, where this particular coupe was produced. If I asked you what the best-selling coupe was in Britain during 1996 to 2001, what would you actually say? Would you say the Ford Puma, maybe the Hyundai Coupe, or possibly the Vauxhall Calibra? Well, in fact, you're wrong. It was the Renault Megane Coupe. Renault had anticipated well the demand for an attractive, inexpensive, and don't forget the time of this, an insurance-friendly sporty model that didn't break down. The Renault Megane Coupe arrived in April 1996 with a choice of 1.6 2-litre or 2-litre 16-valve engines. It was an instant hit. The coupe looked like a 3-door hatch, but in fact it's a 2-door body shell, which obviously delivered benefits in terms of stiffness and rigidity. In fact, the 2-litre 16-valve version even used a version of the Clio Williams engine and was capable of 0 to 62 miles per hour in 8.6 seconds and a frankly ludicrous top speed of 132 miles an hour. Patrick Lequemont was inspired by the Renault 16 hatchback of the late 60s, as I mentioned earlier, and he then looked to apply this look to the entire Renault range, including the Megane Coupe. For instance, the headlamps look very similar to the rest of the range, but only when you see them close up do you notice in fact that they are subtly different from those on the other models in range, namely the 5-door hatchback. In fact, the A-post for the front windscreen is much more steeply raked than on other models, and as you can see here, in fact the vehicle was substantially shorter. Now this is a very aerodynamic car, and it contributes to the fact that even in this 1.6 guise it can still reach 116 miles per hour. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this car does benefit from having a separate boot rather than a hatchback, so glad to see just a normal button there for the boot, and you've got something like, I think, 288 litres. The spare wheel is actually under the floor, so I'll not move everything to get access to it, but you can see a bit better there. The 1598cc petrol engine version, like this, produces a healthy 90 brake horsepower at 5,000 RPM. However, as I mentioned, also available in the coupe range was a 115 2-litre petrol and the 152 litre 16-valve engine, which was fitted in the Clio Williams. But even in this format, it was enough to give a 0 to 60 time for the manual version like this of 11.3 seconds. And helpfully the ECU is well protected in this casing on the wing. And in this instance, this 5-speed manual gearbox was fitted. Now the brakes on this particular 1.6 version are disc at the front, and in fact drum at the rear. You needed to go up to the 2-litre version to actually have discs all the way around. The generous 60-litre fuel tank, combined with fuel economy under the old cycle of 55.3 miles per gallon at 56 miles per hour, right the way down to 34.4 at 75 miles an hour, means you're going to have a pretty generous touring range with this car. Service intervals are every 10,000 miles, with major services at 20,000 miles. By 1997, the Megane Coupe was already taking 10% of the coupe segment since its launch in spring 1996. And Renault decided to build upon this by launching a sub-brand, Fiji. This sub-brand was later applied to a number of models, even including the Scenic. The Megane Coupe Fiji offered £1,350 worth of additional equipment for just £350 more than the standard 1.6e upon which it was based, and benefited from quite a lot of standard equipment. A body-coloured rear spoiler was standard, bespoke Fiji badging, Fiji branded floor mats, front fog lamps were fitted as well. The 14-inch Etrat alloy wheels from the RXE were fitted as well. An electric pack was fitted, comprising of front electric windows and electrically heated and operated door mirrors, an electric tilt and slide sunroof, a courtesy light delay, an exterior temperature gauge. So the vehicle's fitted with smart wipers, which essentially means that when the front wipers are operated and reverse gear is selected, the rear wiper also operates as well. So the one thing you notice about this car, although it's 25 years old, is the quality, the fit, the finish of the plastics is really actually quite good. Soft touch dashboard plastics, two-tone plastics, the black over grey in this instance, cloth inserts to the door cards, the branded Fiji mats here, a decent glove box. Look at that, let's have a look at that. That's really a decent sized glove box, and I'm glad to see we've got a range of cassettes which will work really well with the standard cassette player. If you're a bit younger, ask your dad to explain that one. And you've actually got quite a reasonably deep shelf there, which is a really useful place to put bits and bobs in the car and stop them sliding around. The vents are oval shaped, and this vehicle has the standard radio, although this is an upgraded unit, I believe, from a similar model. Quite unusual to see the shape of some of these buttons, not square or oblong buttons for the French, something a bit more with Gallic flair. Typical of Renaults of this period was the column mounted radio controls, where volume, mute and other radio operations could be performed. Variable wipers are pretty much taken as granted now, but the Renault has them and it's from 25 years ago, so I guess it's certainly a feature worth noting. Here's conveniently located inside the car is the fuse box, which is actually quite handy and quite easy to get at, which is not the case on many cars. The steering column is adjustable, as you can see, and can be moved to suit the driver. One thing you do notice with this car is there's plenty of storage spaces. The side bins, a decent glove box, the tray at the top, a further tray in the middle of the vehicle here is really quite handy. And talking of storage space, what do we find in the back? A further storage space which is perfectly sized for all of those cassettes that you're going to need for the long journeys. Rear head restraints are built in, and to be honest with you, they're actually really good, because vision in this car, being a coupe, is probably not going to be its strongest points, but these don't really get in the way, so that's really handy. Although the rear interior space was potentially a little bit smaller than the 5-door, there is still a reasonable amount of knee and leg room. This particular coupe comes with some lovely period features on here. It's got the headlamp protectors, which I believe were a dealer option, and not every car I've seen has them. Now this sunflower yellow shade really shows off the Renault Megane Coupe Phase 1 or Mark 1 at its best. You can really see why this car was a segment leader in the late 90s. It's a pretty car. It's built on a shorter wheelbase than the other Meganes, and in fact, yes, it looks like a hatchback, but it's not. It's actually got a boot, and you've obviously got some benefits in terms of rigidity. But this particular vehicle that is owned by Mark from Mark on Motoring is a really pretty example. There can't be too many left. I did have a look on Auto Trader to try and find some, and I think I managed to find one which was a later model. So really distinctive looking vehicle, and I guess if you're after something in this segment, certainly Renault had really got its act together by this time in terms of quality, safety, specification, and of course we'll have the chance to drive this shortly as well. Right, so the only thing left for us to do is to actually drive this Renault Megane Coupe and try and form some impressions on how it drives. So let's see how we manage with this Renault Megane Mark 1 Coupe. So we're just exiting the Motorist in Leeds. There's a number of cars in here already. I can see it looks like quite a busy day for the guys. So let's take this Renault Megane out on the road and put it through its paces. So for a coupe, you've actually got quite good visibility. The A-posts are relatively slim, and in fact, unlike some coupes, apart from the rear window, which is a little bit smaller than probably a hatch, it's actually a good compromise in terms of visibility. So let's see how the car picks up. So apparently the owner tells me, Mark, that it thrives on revs, so we're going to hopefully have the opportunity to do that. It's a 5-speed, 6-speed wasn't really that common back in the day. It corners quite flat actually, but the one thing you do notice, certainly I'm noticing already, is the ride quality on this car is not really that harsh. It's actually quite a good ride quality. So this particular car's got 108,000 miles on, and it wears it quite well. You wouldn't think so to drive it. It actually drives quite smoothly. It certainly doesn't feel as baggy as many cars used to feel when they got 100,000 miles on. Picks up quite well. It's a Revy engine, and starting to get out onto the open roads. The car's actually reasonably quiet. I mean, don't forget this was competing with the Mark 6 Escort and the Astras of the time, but in actual fact, for refinement, it's certainly pretty good. Just getting to going back down to 4th. Gear change, maybe not absolutely rifle bolt precise, but there's no problems at all selecting those gears. And cruising along here at 40 miles an hour, it's just ticking along at 2,000 revs. In terms of performance, the car is at the bottom of the range because it's got 90 brake horsepower, but pretty much that's sufficient. And if you think what 90 brake horsepower would have got you, probably a cooking turbo diesel Peugeot 406 or something like I had back in the day would only have 90 brake horsepower, maybe a bit more torque, but certainly not as responsive as this petrol. But it's actually quite a pleasant experience. It's not quite as cramped inside this vehicle as I was led to believe. Certainly for the two front passengers, it's relatively comfortable in here. Okay, if you're going to spend quite a bit of time in the rear of the car, I guess that might be an issue. Interesting, the power steering at low speeds is actually not over light. In fact, if anything, it's reasonably heavy. Interesting enough, the engine feels reasonably torquey. I mean, even dropping down to quite low speeds in third and fourth gear, actually the car doesn't complain too much. So I think it must have a reasonable amount of torque. It certainly drives if it should. So just coming to a stop now. Good old-fashioned handbrake rather than electronic one's good. And we're off again. Let's see how that clutch is. Yeah, it's reasonably heavy. I can imagine that certainly with the 150 horsepower or brake horsepower Renault Clio Williams engine, this car would certainly be a flyer, because you know what, with 90 brake horsepower it's not too bad at all. So we're reaching a national speed limit area, so we can put our foot down a bit. Let's see how it accelerates. So we're in third gear now, let's go. And it does thrive on revs. I'm just over 4,000 and it actually starts to pick up again significantly at 4,000 revs. Into fifth gear, which seems relatively high. Very smooth ride quality. Back into fourth, just take this bend. Yeah, it doesn't handle too badly either. Just starting to get used to it and see whether, you know, how much I can trust it. Back into fifth again, at sort of 50 miles an hour, and it flows really nicely. Seats are comfortable. That's one thing I guess in common with many French cars. It's a very comfortable car to drive, and I guess you probably could do long distance. In fact, Mark Parr, who owns this car from Mark on Motoring, actually drove back to Vilvoorde in Belgium to the factory to see this. So I'll put in a link to Mark's channel. Check out the trip back to Vilvoorde, because that's really a video that's an excellent watch, how he took this car back to the factory it was originally made in. I'm actually enjoying driving this car. I've got some bends here again, and start to push it a little bit harder, and it copes with it very well. It's pretty much free of rattles, and Renault really did turn round their product in this era. That focus on safety and quality, the interior quality, has really paid off, and this car seems, sort of 25 years after it was made, as if it was particularly well screwed together. Really revvy, start to go through the gears again, and reasonably quickly we find ourselves back in fifth at just over 50 miles an hour. Car's running at about 2,500 revs. It's relatively quiet, and I could see how you could certainly go reasonable distances in the car. Brakes are quite good as well. Decelerating down this slip road, brakes do inspire confidence. Although they are disc front and drum rear, and I don't believe this particular car has the optional ABS, it does stop reasonably well. Right, so let's give it a go on acceleration. So there we are, just over, nudging 5,000 revs there. This engine does like revs, doesn't it? So thanks for watching my walk around and review of the Renault Megane Coupe. I think you'll agree it's a really pretty car, and probably one that, although it was a segment bestseller, to some extent has been forgotten about now, because it didn't have a direct replacement from Renault at the time. Certainly with the Bustleback Phase 2 Megane that was launched in its place and looked like a mini version of the Avantime. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please like, share, subscribe, and look forward to you joining me on the next one. Thanks for watching.